Start recording. Okay, now I'm ready. All right, so you heard a little bit of this last week when I had the wrong one, but let's take a moment for what I call the appreciation moment. And I want you to do something is just kind of think about when we first was announcing this, what thoughts maybe you had about, oh, good, we're going to learn about grief. That can be a little scary, but sometimes people are like, okay, I'd like to know that. So maybe you have some expectations, but it's easy as you go through, a process like this to kind of forget the things over 4 weeks that you've actually learned. And when they, accumulate week after week, you don't really remember them so much. So let's take a look at some of the things that says what you have learned. And I'm assuming this is what we've covered. So whether or not we've learned it or not, this is what we've covered. I can define grief. It is the internal response to loss. When something meaningful is changed, taken away, or never comes to be. It's really important to understand what grief is. And so we can recognize it in ourselves and recognize another. And that's the next one, is I can recognize grief in myself through emotional, physical, mental, and behavioral signs. So we're starting to learn how to recognize grief. How to acknowledge that, hey, this is, grief is a part of my life. I'm seeing it show up. That's important because until you know what it is and recognize it, you can't really do anything about it. And so we'll see how it affects us today, and we'll know why we want to do something. So I know grief does not follow a timeline. It may surface unexpectedly even years later. That's important. To recognize that grief does not follow a timeline. You don't have to be over it in 2 weeks. You don't have to be over it in 2 months. Matter of fact, you're not going to be. It's going to up and down, and it's going to show up again at different times. That's not to be scary. It's just once you understand it, you learn to expect it. I know the presence of grief does not mean the absence of what or who? God. The Lord is nigh to them that are of a broken heart. It is very key to remember. Just because I'm experiencing grief does not mean God is not in my life. So many times people get to that place thinking that way, and we have to really recognize that is not true. One of the other things that we know is I know to talk to God honestly about my grief. Learn to talk to God honestly about our grief is a big part of what we're doing. I know to name my grief, write it down, bring it to God. Speaking and writing grief to God helps process it and brings healing. Now, I want you to remember something. Part of what we are learning is how to do this for ourselves, but another part of that is looking at how to help other people with grief. So even if you look at something and go, yeah, I'm probably not going to do that. I mean, even though I should, I'm probably not going to do that. What's the saying? Do as I say, not as I do. So sometimes you might need to help someone else with grief and sound real intellectual about it. Hey, I know what you need to do about this. Trust me, it would work if I did it. But, you get the point. I know that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. He says this in 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness. In grief, we feel our weakness. And so knowing the Bible, we add to this and we go, okay, I know God's strength is made perfect. So God is working through this. So here's some things we'll look at today. How grief affects people. Common mistakes to avoid. That's always good to learn, right? Common mistakes to avoid and healthy habits to promote. So let's look at how grief affects people. Question is there a difference between physical pain and emotional pain? Now, it depends on how you want to answer that question, but think about this. So if you were to watch me accidentally smash my hand, you were to see it, witness it, what immediately am I going to do if I smash my hand? What am I going to do with my other hand? I'm going to grab it. And I'm going to immediately have that response. But here's the thing. What instincts do you have when you witness me smash my hand? Emotional? Do you grimace? You ever find yourself grab your own hand? When we see this happening with people, we immediately, like, ow. We feel what they feel. Now, not to the extent of it, but our brain actually knows what that feeling is, and our body reacts to it. And we didn't even feel the pain. So let's take a look at some of that. Do you cringe? Do you grab your own hand? Does your hand almost hurt? Sometimes people do feel like, because I've seen people like, they'll be shaking their own hand or something. It's like, oh. So we've all experienced some physical pain, and so we almost always feel someone else's pain. And we respond to it immediately, and we respond to it internally. But what about emotional pain from grief? Is it normal for us to feel pain associated with someone else's grief? Yeah, it is. How does something non-physical produce physical pain? Here's what we call it, labeled a fun fact. So scientists at UCLA used brain imaging study. And this is what it means, that they scan the brain and they watch how it lights up, how it does stuff. So they did this study, and they studied people who were grieving the loss of a loved one. They discovered that their brain actually processes emotional pain from grief in the exact same place it processes physical pain. That's really key. The same brain regions light up when you burn your hand or injure your body. They also light up when you experience grief. They're identical. The brain doesn't separate them. And that's important for us to understand. Because we understand if I'm physically hurting, how to take a time out or how to stop for that. But we don't always understand if I'm emotionally hurting, that my body is still going through something. And I need to react to it. So this is why grief may cause you chest pains, headaches, body aches, exhaustion. Your pain's real and it's physical. So even though the source is emotional loss, your brain doesn't actually separate them. Now that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? You're going through something, and now we realize, okay, physical pain, physical fatigue, all of this stuff is associated to the same thing that I would understand if I was going through physical pain. And so we need to really get a better understanding of the categories of pain and realize emotional pain is real. And it causes physical and internal responses. So when you know your grief is causing you your exhaustion or trouble concentrating, you can respond appropriately instead of wondering, what in the world is wrong with me? That helps, right? And you're like, okay, this is natural. I'm feeling this. All right, physical effects. Why am I tired? Why am I sick? So studies actually show that stress hormones, they increase during the time of our physical and our emotional grief. And it explains the constant feeling of being on edge or worn down. But research found that the immune system weakens during grief by how much? 30 to 40%. That is a lot. And that's why people get sick more easily while they're grieving. So just think about this. You've got a loss in your life, you're grieving. And remember, we've identified loss as something far more than just the loss of a loved one. And when that's happening, our immune system can get weak. And this is why so many times when people are going through stuff, it affects us physically, mentally, emotionally. But there's a sickness, we're more prone to being sick. And so we have to be on guard for all of those things. Sleep changes. Some people can't sleep, others sleep too much. Appetite changes. Some people lose interest in food. Guess what other people do? Yeah, they eat too much, right? All right, so which one? What are y'all? I might be an emotional eater. Others eat more. So fatigue sets in that rest doesn't fix. And that's interesting because your body feels heavy or exhausted even after sleeping. So someone tells you, hey man, you need to get some rest, and you're so frustrated because why? You're like, well, I slept 10 hours yesterday, or 12 hours yesterday, and I feel exhausted. What's going on? Well, what's going on is emotional fatigue that's happening in our body. Grief can even trigger real medical conditions called broken heart syndrome. You ever heard somebody died of a broken heart, or someone's dealing with a broken heart? It's a real thing. No, not necessarily dying from it, but in a sense, it's where the heart is stressed in ways that look like a heart attack. God created us as a whole being. Scripture speaks of your whole spirit, your soul, and your body in 1 Thessalonians 5:23. All of it is connected. So when one part of you suffers, your whole body is affected. And your grief affects your body, and these physical effects have real consequences to them. So don't just power through grief, because your body is not going to power through it. Eventually, your body is going to break down on you. And so acknowledging the grief and learning, hey, this is a more healthy way to do it. Years ago, I don't want to be the generation that blames things on the generations ahead of us and stuff. I get that. But years ago, people just wanted to get over everything, right? Just man up, or, just suck it up, or get over it, But yet, that's not a healthy way of handling things. And, you can go too far in the other extreme, but this one is something important for us to understand too. I need to check that one later. Mental and cognitive effects. So here's what happens to us mentally and cognitively. Let's do a quick exercise. Think of a time when you experienced loss of any type, anything that you really significantly lost. Did you notice trouble concentrating, difficulty remembering things you just heard, feeling like your brain was in a fog? The truth is, we're not alone in that. Think about people going through a loss. We kind of see them kind of like it might seem like they're a zombie going through things, right? Well, understand again, we have to not just put loss, the grief with the loss of a loved one, but loss of things that never came to be, loss of something that was, hoped for, loss of things that are just normal parts of life that we lose, relationships, health, all of these things, but realizing that brings grief. Grief brings physical problems into our life. Studies published in Neuropsychology found that grief impairs the prefrontal cortex. Now, I am not a medical person. I am recording what is written there. It's the part of our brain that's responsible for our concentration, decision-making, and memory. All of us, we might not understand that. But let's just say we do talk to someone that just experienced a great loss and they're getting ready to make a big decision. What would we tell them right then? Take time. Why? You're going to make an irrational decision. Why are we more prone to make an irrational decision during that time? The actual part of our brain that makes rational decisions is affected. So it's not like a personal, you have a problem, you can't make decisions now. It's everybody. Hey, slow down. Don't do this right away. Take some time. Because though it feels right, the part of your brain that's rational isn't functioning properly. So dealing with that in grief, we need to understand sometimes we've got to figure out how to do that. Research documented that people grieving show measurable deficits in working memory, executive function. This is why you forget appointments, lose track of conversations, or struggle to make simple decisions. Because physically, that part of your brain is actually affected. Scientists call this grief fog. Look, it actually has a name. Grief fog or widow's fog. And research shows it can last 6 months or longer. Let's all say, wow. Wow, that's a while. 6 months or longer. Now, when I was looking at this, here's one thing that came to my mind. How many of us experienced more than one loss over a period of 6 months to a year? Yeah. So if grief fog can last 6 months or more and you keep having different stages, you're going to keep having certain struggles. And so it's just kind of understand. Doesn't mean it's hopeless. It means once we understand it, we can do things to help deal with it. All right, so your brain is using so much energy processing the loss that less energy is available for everyday thinking tasks. I love to read that because it helps us realize something. It's not that my brain got damaged. It's that it is using up too much memory and RAM over here, if you're computer savvy, that it can't process everything over here. So even though we're pretending we're not dealing with grief, our brain is like, you do what you want to do, but I'm dealing with it over here. And I'm using up so much memory and energy that I can't even focus on regular everyday things. Well, don't worry. By the end of this, we got a solution for that. or help with it. So this explains why reading feels harder. You know, can't quite process what I read. I used to refine it, and that's not me, but I'm just saying when you're going through fog, why you replay things over and over, and why planning ahead feels impossible for some people. When you look at that statement, just think about this. You're talking to somebody that's dealt with the grief. You're trying to get them through decisions. Here's a statement you might hear them make. You can finish this for me. I can't deal with that right now. Can't think about that right now. I can't figure that out right now. What they're saying, my brain won't focus on that right now. Well, that's a real thing. It's not just them. It's not a weakness. It's a human element of our life. So it's natural. That's why the next line says, this is normal. I think if there's anything, if you underline things or highlight stuff, underline or highlight that. This is normal. But once we realize something is normal, then we don't feel abnormal ourselves. Something wrong with me. This is normal. It's to be expected. This is how God made us. Our brain is processing grief, which takes enormous mental energy. And God doesn't expect us to function in our full capacity while we're grieving. The Bible says this to the Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul's writing this, saying God revealed it to him. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in what? In weakness. Hey, it's okay. God's with us. Yeah, God's got us during this time. But we got to depend on God, and that's why we got to go to God with what we're dealing with. So research shows that cognitive function, that's our thinking, returns gradually over time. It's not permanent brain damage. That's good to know. It's like a hallelujah moment, right? Because when this happens and when our brain's not functioning right, it's scary. And when it goes on for a few months, you think, is this ever going to come back? But research shows it gradually does come back over time. And so it functions over time. This is not permanent brain damage. This is your brain doing the work of grief. And there are practical ways to help your brain through this season, which we'll cover a little bit later in the sessions. So here's what we need to know. Your brain and your body are going to deal with grief. Even if you refuse to deal with it, your brain and body is going to. What can get your brain and body over it faster is to face it, to talk about it, to deal with it. So if you want to get rid of the brain fog, and you want to get rid of the fatigue, and you want to get rid of all the symptoms of it, do the hard part. Deal with it. Because then you heal faster. And that is really vital for us in our understanding. Let's talk about how it affects us in our emotional part. You ever felt sad one moment, angry the next, and then suddenly felt nothing at all, maybe in some kind of process? In other words, we're saying, have you ever been on one of those emotional roller coasters? All right, so grief affects how you experience and manage emotions. So more research, the American Journal of the Psychiatry used brain imaging again. They studied people in grief, and they found that, Christy, how did I say that word again? Amygdala. My brain does not want to say that word. Well, my brain tries, but my tongue doesn't want to say that word. It's the part of our brains that regulates emotions. And it becomes, get this, hyperactive during grief. And this explains why emotions feel more intense, unpredictable, harder to control. You might feel sad, or sadness that comes in waves. Anger that seems to come out of nowhere. Guilt over things you did not, you did or that you didn't do. You just can't get over one or the other. Anxiety about the future. Numbness, feeling nothing at all when you think you should feel something. More research done in the Journal of Affective Disorders found that difficulty experiencing pleasure, I looked that word up earlier, how to pronounce it, and I've lost it again. I'm not going to try to pronounce that one, but it's common in the first 6 months. Basically, it's a condition where people don't have the ability to experience pleasure or enjoy things as much, but also how to, they cope with those things. So what we're saying through this is the emotional responses are, again, normal. That's the part that we want you to highlight or underline. It's how God made us, and Scripture shows us that God's people experience full range of emotions. Let's look at this. David felt deep sadness, and he expressed that in Psalms 42, verse number 5. Job felt anger and confusion in Job 3, and really all through Job. The disciples felt fear and anxiety after Jesus' death. So your brain is processing loss, and your emotions are part of that process. Some days emotions feel overwhelming. So why did I bring up these people from the Bible that felt all these things? I didn't hear. What? They're examples. Why are they good examples for us?
God's teaching.
God's teaching. These are godly people. They dealt with real life emotions. Our spirituality is not connected to to dealing with these things. It's connected. Let me say, one of the things we'll cover in a little while is, one of the lies is you're not spiritual enough, that's why you're dealing with this. But all of God's people have dealt with these things. Why? They're human. And we must not separate the two and feel that because I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to feel normal human things or walk through it in a normal human way. God designed us this way. One of the things I don't want to skip, I got to move quick, but I don't want to skip over what I was looking at earlier. When I was saying that we go on this emotional ride because the part of our brain that deals with emotions is hyperactive, we give people more grace when they're going through something, right? Meaning this, someone just went through a serious loss. They snap at somebody and you watch it. They snap at somebody, they walk off, or they just melt down and they walk off, and the person's sitting there dumbfounded and confused or angry. And what do? You walk over to them and you explain, hey, it's not their fault. They've just gone through this loss. All of a sudden that person goes, okay. I mean, they're not fully okay that this person just lost it on them, but you understand, we naturally give people more grace during that time. Why? We know and expect that person to be on this emotional wave. What's the difference? We don't give who grace during grief? Ourselves. We don't give ourselves that same grace. Now we're just mad because we lost it on somebody, or we're mad because we broke down somewhere. We're mad that we can't hold it together in public. And we feel like we beat ourselves up, right? We're disappointed in ourselves. But for someone else, we give grace. We've got to learn to give ourselves that same amount of grace. And to say, hey, it's okay. You know what? My brain is hyperactive in this area right now. This is normal. You are harder on yourself. Now, I do want to say this. It is not a license to be mean and ugly and sinful. You don't get to go, I got this loss. I'm just going to tell these people what I really think about them. That's not, it doesn't work that way. It's saying that when we're trying to hold it together, we're trying to do it, and we don't, we should just recognize that it's perfectly normal. And I would give grace to someone else going through that. And I need to be more graceful to myself. So that's the part I didn't want to miss, because I think it's pretty important. So looking at the next one, it says behavioral and relational effects. How does grief affect us in these ways? Think of someone who went through a loss of some type. Did they start avoiding people or places? Probably. Did they start staying home more? Maybe they seem distant or harder to reach. You reach out to people for a while, they don't respond. They're harder to connect with. Maybe they stayed constantly busy, never slowing down. These are behavioral responses to grief. One of our favorite words in this, research published in Death Studies. Boy, that sounds like a good... Does anybody subscribe to Death Studies? I'm not a member of that one. But they found that 60 to 70% of people experiencing grief withdraw socially. Wow. What does this tell us to look for if someone's experiencing grief? Social withdrawal. Let's turn that around. What if we know someone and we notice they're going through, they're experiencing a lot of social withdrawal? What should we at least question about that? Not saying you got to go to them and question it, but for ourselves, we're observing it. What should that trigger for us? That person might be grieving something. You ever made this same? What's wrong with them? They don't never want to do anything anymore. They don't never do things with people. They just stay to themselves now. What's wrong with them? Well, we shouldn't ask that question anymore because we've got the answer. I mean, we can't guarantee that's what it is. I mean, sometimes a person can be sick. It could be lots of things. And it could be anxiety, but it could be grief. And when we think about that, we go, wow, how can I help this person that's dealing with grief? How can I pray for this person that might be dealing with grief? You know, at first it can be frustrating. And then when you look at it, you go, wait a minute. Maybe instead of being frustrated, I need to be compassionate towards this person. And that helps me. It helps us as we look at that. So some people avoid places or people or situations that remind them of the loss that they experienced. Other people stay constantly busy to avoid feeling the grief. Both of these are attempts to manage overwhelming emotions. I think that's important because if you're watching somebody and they're like, isolating themselves, you go, that's not good. They really need to get around people. You're watching someone else and they're just super busy and just knocking it out and getting everything done. You go, they're actually doing pretty good. They're doing better than I thought they was doing with this grief. It's like, wait a minute. No, they're not. They're both bad signs that grief isn't being dealt with. So the behavioral changes affect relationships. Research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships documented that grief makes communication more difficult. It reduces patience with others, and it creates feelings of disconnect even from close relationships. So studies show that relationships often experience strain during grief. Some friendships deepen while others fade. I'll give you another one. It is not that uncommon for a husband and wife to go through a loss like lose a child, and within the next 5 years be divorced. Why is that?
They don't know how to handle the grief or just
Together, they withdraw, and they get harder to deal with. And it doesn't have to be the loss of a loved one, but I'm just saying, like, I've seen that a lot through the years. And with any loss, people deal with things, and it's, sometimes you think, how in the world? Looks like they got closer, but not everyone does. Matter of fact, it's almost more common that people don't, unless they experience going through it together. That's why counseling is good for people. It helps them say, hey, let's bring this out on the table. So if you're dealing with loss and grief, understand something. You might be inadvertently sabotaging your own relationships. So it's a big red flag to say, let me make sure I deal with my grief, because this person I love and care about that's here with me, I might jeopardize that. And I want to do the right thing. So that's a big part of it. Common mistakes to avoid. Here we go. Here's the good stuff. Let's avoid some common mistakes. Everybody ready? Number 1, the mistake of avoiding grief. Well, there goes suck it up. Get over it. Deal with it. All that goes out the window, because that's a mistake. Let's look at what it says. You will be tempted to avoid places, people, and situations that remind you of the loss. In the moment, this seems helpful. I can't do that. I can't do it. That feels helpful. But it's not. Avoiding grief increases anxiety, makes intrusive thoughts more frequent, causes grief to last months or even years longer than it would otherwise. Your brain needs to process the loss. When you avoid it, the unprocessed grief keeps surfacing through physical symptoms, emotional outbursts, mental fog. Avoidance doesn't reduce grief, it delays and intensifies it. The other week I made a statement that part of grief and trauma counseling is if Kurt just experienced a really traumatic event, saw something really horrific, grief counseling now says, hey, immediately, like as soon as I can, I need him to talk about that. And not just like, Kurt, how do you feel about that? That's not what he's talking about. Some of the things I read says, let's talk about what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what you smelled. All of that, all the senses. Tell me about that. Because it sounds horrible. I don't want to relive that. Well, you're going to relive that. But if you relive it now early, you won't keep reliving it. That makes sense? So what seems like the hardest thing to do is often the most helpful thing to do. Number 2, avoid pushing emotions down. So you're going to be tempted to refuse to cry or show emotions. You tell yourself things like this: I need to be strong. I can't fall apart. But suppressing emotions damages your immune system. Wow. It raises your blood pressure. Yeah, okay. It disrupts your sleep, and it makes cognitive function worse. So studies show that people who suppress grief experience symptoms for twice as long as those who suppress it. Or express it, sorry. Pushing grief down doesn't make it go away. It makes it last longer and damages your body in the process. We're learning some stuff now, right? I mean, this is big stuff. Now, it doesn't make it easier to do, but it makes us know the right things to do. Number 3, staying constantly busy. How many of us would kind of know, like right off the bat, that that's probably not healthy? Like, I mean, it sounds good, like keep yourself busy. There's a part of that that's true. But knowing that, hey, just being busy for busy's sake, like frantically busy, is not good, but we don't necessarily know why. So here's what we learn. You'll be tempted to fill every moment with work or projects or activities to avoid feeling the grief. So if you talk to someone and they say, well, I'm staying busy, our response normally is going to be, that's good. But are you staying too busy? Your brain processes grief during, what does it say? Rest and sleep. When you stay constantly busy, you prevent your brain from doing the necessary work of processing the loss. And this extends the duration of grief symptoms and increases physical exhaustion. You can't deal with grief until you sit still for a while. It's just part of it. But that's the part people recoil from. No, I got to stay busy. I just got to get through it. It'll go away eventually. Not until we really deal with it. And it deals with it during our rest. Number 4, believing the lie that grief means weak faith. This is what I talked about earlier. So as Christians, you'll feel tempted to feel guilty about your grief. If it extends, especially. In the beginning, not so much. But if it extends, people start to feel guilty. And you might deal with the lie that grief means lack of faith or spiritual weakness. Some Christians think if they had more faith, they would heal faster. I've dealt with that with people a lot. It's just not true. Sometimes there's knowing the Bible. That's why I use Bible verses. Building our faith a little bit that strengthens some things, but just it's more about catching the lies and filling it with truth than it is about having weak faith. I wish I was a strong Christian like them. I'd have got over this by now. Well, that's not necessarily true. Others quoted verses about, some Christians think if they had more faith, they would heal faster. Others quote verses about joy and victory while refusing to acknowledge their pain. This isn't biblical faith. It is believing a lie about what faith requires. Now, here's a key. The Psalms, the book of Psalms, are full of honest grief brought to God. Read the Psalms. A lot of it, there's joy, there's praise, but there's a lot of grief that's dealt with in there. And the psalmist is doing what? Naming it, writing it, taking it to God. Those are the things we're supposed to be doing. If the Psalms are helpful because we're walking through someone else's experience of doing it will be helpful for us. Lamentations is an entire book of grief. Jesus wept openly. Biblical faith doesn't skip grief. It brings grief honestly to God. So grief and faith can coexist. We're doing good on time. Thank you. Biblical faith doesn't skip grief, brings it honestly to God. Believing otherwise only adds shame to an already painful experience. I want to take a second to throw in something here. That's why we have to be very careful as Christians what we tell people when they're going through grief. Because we can inadvertently make them feel guilty about their grief. How can we do that? What's a way that we might accidentally make someone feel more guilty about their grief? Okay, tell them they shouldn't be doing something. What else?
You should be over it by now.
You should be over it by now. Yeah. Anything else?
Sometimes God knows what's best for you. He's gonna help, just disregarding their feelings, just saying,
Yes. As you walk through this part with knowing God knows how to let you process your grief, when we go to someone, if we say, all right, so we do this, I guess you have to be careful. You have to know the situation and the context, okay? Because sometimes the right thing in this situation is the wrong thing in another situation. I heard a statement this week in one of the books I was listening to. It said the right thing at the wrong time is still the wrong thing. And that simply means you can say a truth, but if you say that truth at the wrong time, it's still the wrong thing to say. So you shouldn't feel bad. They're in heaven. Well, I know they're in heaven. That's why I feel bad. They're not here. But you're telling me if I was happy, if I was spiritually right, I wouldn't feel this pain. But we go to the Bible and we don't see that. Matter of fact, this is very big to help us with this. Shortest verse in the Bible. I don't know the reference, but I do know the words. There's 2 words. What are they? Jesus wept. When did Jesus weep? When do we see, does that verse apply? What context is he weeping in? Lazarus had died, and the people around were hurting. What did Jesus know he was getting ready to do with Lazarus? Raise him back from the dead. Yet Jesus wept. Why? Because that situation caused a lot of pain. So though Jesus fully understood everything, matter of fact, no one understood heaven better than Jesus. And Jesus still wept over that loss because of how that loss was affecting him and the people that cared about Lazarus. So let that be true. So it's not saying don't ever tell people, like, there's some things that we can help focus on. Hey, when this hurts, I am glad they're not hurting. I am glad for these things. But the two, like, we shouldn't come in and say, because I should be happy, because I'm glad they're not hurting, because I'm glad they're not going through this, doesn't mean that I shouldn't hurt about their loss. But if I learn to do the healthy things about taking their memory and applying good memories, remembering the good stuff, and even remembering at times, I am glad they're not hurting. It eases this pain that I'm dealing with. Or if we just go to people and we say, I don't like this one at all because this is just not biblical. God needed them more than we need them here. That is... One day y'all going to see your pastor go off on somebody. I'm really praying I don't sometimes. It just amazes me. I know it's meaning helpful. But I guess part that gets me is I've actually dealt with people that are, why did God need them more? Well, he didn't. This happened because sin is in the world and sin brought death. God needed an angel. The Bible doesn't say that we become angels. The Bible says it is appointed unto man once to die. That's life. That's real. And it's going to bring pain. But God is a comforter that comes alongside to help us. So I just want to bring in there, let's don't add to this mistake of believing a lie. So let's do some practices, some healthy habits real quick. I was so happy we was doing ahead of time. Now I got to rush. So healthy habits, because we've learned some things to avoid. And this is why you have handouts. Take this home and don't just hear it once. Like, read over this over and over again. Pull it out when you're doing some things. But here's number 1, communicate grief. Our brains are designed by God to process grief, and the best practices for this are talking about it, writing about it, and not resisting tears. Talk to God about what you're feeling. Write it down on paper. Speak it out loud. I say write it down. I type stuff out more than I write down because my handwriting is horrible and I don't enjoy handwriting things. But I can type stuff out. It still gets it out. But I will say this. I think scientifically handwriting it is more beneficial. But I just throw it out there. Speak it out loud. Don't hold back tears. This is the proven method that promotes healing with the fewest physical symptoms. God invites us to come to him with our grief. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, he shall sustain thee. Number 2, maintain simple routines. Remember earlier we learned that your brain is using up so much energy that it can't process simple things anymore, the stuff. So here's the help to that. God designed our brains to function better with structure. So the more we do on routine, or autopilot is another way to think of that. The more things we can do on autopilot, the fewer decisions we have to make. And the more our minds can devote energy to processing our grief. So go to bed and get up on a schedule. Just set it as a schedule during that time. Eat on a schedule. Implementing routines gives you structure and frees up mental energy. Even if it is temporary, structure your routines to decrease the number of decisions you have to make so you have more capacity to make decisions only you can make. That's as simple as already determining it's Monday, or for breakfast, I'm always going to eat the same thing during this time. Why? I don't have to think about it. I'm going to eat a general, get consistent with the lunch. Why? How frustrating. If you've ever been stressed and all of a sudden you got to figure out what you're going to eat for lunch or where you're going to go for lunch, it can be like the straw that broke the camel's back, can't it? I mean, it's just the weirdest thing. You've dealt with everything that day, and all of a sudden it's like, what are we going to eat? I don't know. You just got to freak out about it. Well, determine that stuff ahead of time. Fix your lunch. Think of it. Lay out your clothes ahead of time. Pre-plan. On Mondays, I'm wearing this. It may seem odd, but the less decisions you have to make, the more energy your brain can process the grief, and the faster you get over it, and then you can get back to switching it up again. Exercise. Even 20 minutes of walking increases the blood flow to the brain. It reduces our stress hormones, improves our concentration and our memory. Walk, stretch, garden, clean the house, wash the car, exercise in whatever way works for you. Our brains process grief better when we stay physically active. Now, they didn't say stay too busy. It's saying get some activity.
You can overdo that real.
Right, you can overdo it real quick and go the wrong direction with it. So you have to understand that. Give yourself grace, is what I talked about earlier. When people are grieving, their capacity is reduced. That's normal. God's grace is sufficient for us in our weakness. So people dealing with grief need to write things down. Ask for help. These are things you may not have. I don't want to write things down. I never had to write things down before. That's not me. I'm saying that's what people might feel sometimes. I've always been able to remember it. Well, you can't right now, so write it down because it'll be less grief. I've never needed help. I don't like to ask for help. Well, this is the time you need it. This is not this is not you at your fullest strength. And if you want to get back to that, change it up, write things down, use a calendar, ask for help. People dealing with grief need to write things down, ask for help with complex tasks, and accept help from others. Giving yourself grace, meaning I'm not weak because I need this help, it speeds up the healing process. So in closing, we started by looking at the things that we've learned about grief. Now we understand how grief affects people, physically, mentally, emotionally, and relationally. We know the mistakes to avoid, and we know practices that promote healing. What you can do starting at this point, communicate your grief, maintain simple routines, exercise, and give yourself some grace to allow help or allow yourself not to be at 100% of what you've always done. Remember, the title of our series is Living with God in Grief, and this is what we're learning to do. God remains close to us in this time of our processing. And so we keep our verses clear. All right, so that is our lessons for today. We'll have